Usually I have Maggie up here to help save me um, on these things. That wherever you go, when you're doing community forestry, it's going to be the same kind of story, except for every story is going to be different. So let's get started. So what are some of the underlying features of community forestry? I would argue that community forestry is essentially transdisciplinary science and practice. And there are some fundamental things that are part of that transdisciplinary science and practice. First, they are wicked problems. And what does wicked problems mean? Wicked problems means that there's no easy technical solution and that there are many different viewpoints about the definition of that problem and what the solution may be. And not only are there different definitions, but there's actually conflict about what those definitions are. And they may create very heated disputes. And so one of the key things that one has to become accustomed to is how to work through those different viewpoints. And there are some classic processes to do that. Second, and it kind of complements this idea of wicked problems, is that these problems are complex. And here, and for those who've taken my class before, we spend perhaps way too much time talking about complicated versus complex problems. And the point here is not complicated and complex. The difference is just how many parts are there. It is what are the interactions among the parts. And so we can have things like a spaceship, which has many parts, but still a complicated system. Ideally, all the feedbacks, the way the parts work together, are very predictable. However, in complex systems, we may not know how those parts interact. They may have positive or negative feedback loops to them. And here, positive and negative is not a normative statement. It's a statement about the system properties. It may be adaptive. It may not be adaptive. It may be resilient. It may not be resilient. And so we are dealing with complex problems where we may have few, we may have many parts, but essentially the interactions among the parts, we may not know. Third is this idea of co-production and stone soup. And we'll talk a little bit later about what I mean by stone soup. But this idea that we have to co-produce our understanding of what the problems, plural, are. We need to co-produce what we think are the interactions and listing out what the parts are. And we have to co-produce what the different solutions may be. And for the different parties to our community forestry projects, the kind of solutions that we want, what I want may be different than what you want, or what you want, or what you want. Ideally, though, the solution satisfies all of our needs and addresses all of our problems. And then finally, and this is sort of an orientation of like where are we headed, what are we trying to achieve, is this idea of regenerative social ecologies. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment too. So regenerative social ecologies. The basic idea here is a framing, and at the center, it's important to recognize that community forestry is more than just trees. I would argue that community forestry ideally touches many, maybe not all, but more than you think, of the sustainable development goals that have been developed. So we should be interested in employment, we should be interested in equity, we should be interested in income, education, as well as the forests and the water and so on. So, become familiar with what those sustainability development goals are, and to realize that that is your portfolio of what you're trying to achieve. And then at one end of the spectrum, we have what we call degenerative cultures. And so remember, I said degenerative, not degenerate, right? This is not a social statement, but degenerative cultures. Much of the way our society is working now is degenerative cultures. The system is degrading. We are losing energy. We are losing water. We are losing all of these things that are inherent into the system. We could argue, and many people make a lot of noise about becoming sustainable. And in this framing, one would argue that sustainability, like you shouldn't get a gold star for sustainability. Like you're just staying where you are. You're treading water, right? No gold stars for this. What we argue is that we should be working towards regenerative social ecological systems where we're making it better, we're creating a better system than we found it. And in doing so, we are thinking like nature. We are thinking like old growth forests where there is no waste, where there is tightly wound recycling of nutrients matter, water, that we are retaining these things. We're not losing them. And in this sense, there is no waste. If we have waste, it is a signal that we're probably not sustainable and we're probably a degenerative system. So in our framing about like when we are doing community forestry, there's an orientation and then there's an approach to how we would build regenerative ecological systems. So what I'd first like to start talking about is this idea of Still Meadow Peace Park. And I want to recognize, and I've had the good fortune of working with the Hickson program, that we've had a number of different Hickson fellows who have built over time this body of work that we're about to see. So to enumerate some of those people, so Jen Shin, Gabe LePage, Brandon Wilson Radcliffe, Hannah Vase, and Maggie Proctor have all worked on this project. So I'm going to start this video and sit down for a moment.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Still Meadow Community Fellowship. I'm happy to see you, happy to be seen by you. My name is Michael Stephen Martin, and I'm the pastor of Still Meadow Community Fellowship here in Baltimore, Maryland. This is called Charm City, and you can't argue with the human resources and the natural resources here.
My name is Nancy Santi. I'm a research ecologist with the U.S. Forest Service, and I'm based here at our Baltimore field station. Still Meadow Community Fellowship owns 10 acres of land, and they have a peace park. A few years ago, they got really interested in managing the forest and in using it for the local community.
My name is Terrace King II. I am a kindergarten teacher. I'm also head of Temple X Schools and proud member of this Still Meadow community. All right, let's go. The environment is the teacher. What we're just trying to do is make an introduction. Introduce nature to the family. Introduce nature to the child. And do it in a way that lays it open for anyone.
What we're going to do today is some stream research. My name is Riley Warnock. I'm a graduate student working on community-driven science. If you're working with historically marginalized communities in urban spaces, there's not been science that's been done in people's backyards. Doing the science where people live and care about is really important to building identities.
We are on the Baltimore City, Baltimore County line. This is a really diverse community. You have different types of people from different walks of life. This is a place that connects all the dots. It connects the city and the county. It connects this concept of peace to this sometimes not true conviction that this is the most crime-ridden place that you could live.
I come to this place to be quiet, to find peace. I'm able to exit trauma, which is real, the city of Baltimore. I exit noisiness. I can hear the breeze. I can hear the birds. It's a calming place.
A lot of urban ecology science was born in Baltimore. It was founded as a long-term experimental research site in the late 90s and has continued through to today with teams of academics and practitioners working together to understand the social ecological system of Baltimore and the Chesapeake Bay and the surrounding region.
I think we should collect these, maybe take them back.
Wait, I found some of these before.
You have? Temple X is an early childhood, alternative, innovative educational model that is really about bringing together 3 different stakeholders: faith leaders, early childhood professionals, and scientists. We're trying to open up a space so that children here can engage in nature, but through arts, technology. What you'll see here is fine artists doing observational drawings.
Really good, you guys.
You'll see music. We're trying to really fill in a lot of things that aren't happening in school.
In urban forestry, we think about managing a site for biomass as well as biodiversity, clean water, clean air. And even if that biomass isn't going towards timber production necessarily, it's still contributing to critical ecosystem services. So instead of letting these trees go to waste, whether it's a street tree coming down or a board coming out of a deconstructed row home, we're trying to make a productive full life cycle for the urban forest.
I kind of consider myself a green pastor. We're trying to bring everybody along the pathway The planet matters, the city matters, and nature matters even in the city, and you can have some impact on it.
There are things in Baltimore we have to cut down. There are things that we have to restore. What I've found really beautiful about Still Meadow is it gives you a practical way. What we know here is you have to use everyone. It's not just a black or white thing, it's not a gender thing. We need everyone at the table.
I think that we are becoming a model and a resource. We are moving toward a healthy forest. We planted something close to 2,000 cuttings and saplings.
Whether we're talking about a privately owned forest in rural Georgia, a national park out in Wyoming, or 10 acres of woods here in Baltimore, it's critical to have a long-term plan for stewardship and care of your forest.
Our young people own these woods in their spirits. They are their woods because we're teaching them how to be stewards of the woods. The cultivation of this Peace Park is one of the more revolutionary acts that I've seen in Baltimore City in my life.
Yeah. That's the industry people who did the video. So that's sort of, I think, sort of 5 minutes of fun introduction that other people got to speak to you about for the project in Still Meadow. It started initially in Baltimore after really a catastrophic flood that happened. There was what's happening now in Baltimore and other cities is that we're not getting major rain events that cover an entire city, but these very localized storm cells that occur, and it could be raining in one side of Baltimore and complete sunlight on the other side. And at Still Meadow, what they experienced was one of these rain cells where they got 3 inches of rain in an hour, and the water going down the road was 10 feet high. And cars were getting swept away. People had to be rescued from the bus by the fire department in their boats on a regular street in Baltimore. And basements were flooded, and people didn't have insurance. And then it was followed by a heat wave, and then the mold started, and the homes had to be abandoned. We started to work with the church and this idea of a resilience hub. And Pastor Michael said, they had something called the woods and what could be done. And could the forest be managed in a way that could reduce the amount of flooding that the neighborhood was experiencing? And so that's how we first started to begin. And I was very purposeful of listing the Yale interns, the Yale Hickson Fellows who came, because they were really phenomenal in starting the conversations for us to start to enumerate what were the different views, because this was a wicked problem. We had many different perspectives on what were the issues in the forest, what were the issues in the neighborhood, and so on. And so this is sort of a figure that should look familiar to some people who have worked for a long time with the National Science Foundation, the press pulse diagram that came out of the LTR program. And part of my point here, and I think it's a fundamental idea to doing community forestry, is that you need a way to organize everyone's different perspectives on what is going on and seeing where is there commonality and how can we come up with one solution that solves many problems, as well as where there's some things, you're not going to get everything you want. You may get nothing that you want. You don't know that until you start to put these things together. And so on the right-hand side, what you look at, we had forest community structure. We had declining plant biodiversity. We had lots of invasive plants. We discovered that 40% of all the trees were ash, and they all died within a year and a half. We had a loss of forest regeneration. Wildlife habitat was, the arrows are going up and down because the deer were very happy, but nothing else was. In terms of ecosystem function, we were losing primary production. Evapotranspiration was going down, which was very important as it relates to flooding. Nutrient transport was going up, meaning that we were losing nutrients from the system. And again, remember, we talked about regenerative social ecologies. We want to keep those nutrients. We want to keep the water. And we were getting this very flashy hydrology. In terms of ecosystem services, we have nutrient filtration retention. That was going down. Carbon sequestration is going down. Stormwater runoff and erosion is going down. Opportunities for foraging, it was a mix again. Wood products down. Cultural, the aesthetic and recreational value was down. in order to get through that park initially, when we started in 2019, it was an operation with a machete. And you were following the deer trails through it. And I fussed at Pastor Michael. Pastor Michael and I are very good friends. And I fussed at Pastor Michael because he's going through in his shorts. And I'm like, there's ticks, there's poison ivy. Like, what? And I'm the Forest Service guy. I'm like, oh, safety first person. And he's going through, and I was like, this is not good. And then the supporting ecosystem services. And then there's human outcomes, right? And so we have mental health and well-being is going down. We have the trauma from the flood. We have the trauma from families that have had lost family members due to gun violence and drug overdoses. Quality of life is going down. Spiritual connections to nature. Like, that is not something that I would put in this diagram, right? That is something that Pastor Michael and the church wanted to put in here. And I should really highlight that a lot of the things in the yellow box is what the church wanted to put in, the neighborhood wanted to put in, and then us card-carrying ecologists, if you're going to let me be a card-carrying ecologist, we were on the green side, and the ecosystem services, like, they were putting their different things in there, right? And so we have civic engagement and volunteering also declining. Network partnerships, very isolated Black neighborhood. They were literally watching the news vehicles drive through their neighborhood after the flood to go to Ellicott City and report on the white, rich neighborhood that got flooded. Urban and community forestry funding, it was down. It's even down more. So external drivers, we have climate and globalization. And some of the things that we had in terms of pulses, we had this flooding. We always are going to have heat waves. And to remember that what is anticipated is that the major cause of mortality in urban areas with time is going to be heat waves where we live. Emerald ash borer infestation, as I said, we lost all the trees. Then we had COVID-19. Like, this project started during COVID-19. One of the things, though, was that people could actually come to the park and work and be 5 feet away from each other, right? It was like one of the few times that people actually had social interaction during this time. And then we had these presses, and the distinction between pulses and presses, right? I should clarify. Pulses are, big events that happen that ideally have some periodicity of short time, and then presses are the stresses that accumulate and are occurring over long periods of time. So climate instability, structural inequality, rising unemployment, decreasing neighborhood safety, invasive plants. We also had invasive earthworms, and then increasing deer herbivory. And then there's a comment or a phrase now, which is recurring acute disaster. Some of these things that are episodic, the pulses, are starting to happen with such frequency that they're becoming presses on the system. So underlying the video that you saw was this. And I would encourage you, wherever you go, to start to think about these kinds of diagrams or some sort of framing that you can start to accumulate all the different perspectives that you're hearing that are part of the wicked problem and that are part of a complex problem. How do we organize these things together? They are fundamental to this transdisciplinary science and transdisciplinary practice that we call community forestry. Also, this idea of complexity and co-production, which we alluded to before. So you know that you're going to have to gather these ideas. Well, how do we go about doing it? So inherently, when we approach complicated problems, there's like a good organizational fit for doing those complicated problems. And it usually looks like some sort of hierarchical structure like this. Military's famous for this, but you go look at any organizational chart for most businesses, and it's like lots of this hierarchical. Another way of saying it is also siloed. We are not going to get to regenerative social ecologies by siloed approaches. We've got to come up with new forms of how to do this. Most famously was a book by General McCafferty, who wrote a book here at Yale called Team of Teams. And he first started to do this because when he was the general leading all the forces in Iraq, and what they were recognizing was that the U.S. military was losing to Al Qaeda because the U.S. military was structured as a complicated system, and they were fighting an enemy who was approaching it as a complex problem. And he had to completely reorganize the U.S. military to do something which is called a team of teams. And so his point in the book talks about was going from treating the problem. And in the book, he then identifies many other examples, right, where it's treated as a complicated problem and should be treated as a complex problem. And we need to go from an organizational structure of command and control to what he calls a team of teams. And I've rephrased it here for a moment to be stone soup. And very purposefully, I want to change it a little bit to stone soup, same sort of like structural interactions. But how many of you are familiar with the children's book Stone Soup? Awesome. So I do community forestry, and like I'm reading to my daughter, she's 3, I'm reading Stone Soup to her. I'm like, oh my God, this is community forestry. So for those of you who have read it, you may not be getting where I'm going to, but at the moment, and for those of you who haven't read the book, let me describe. So in my version of the book that I read, the story goes that there are these 3 Buddhist monks who go into this village. And they have this big pot. And they're gathering firewood, and this little boy comes out and says, well, what are you doing? And they say, we're making stone soup. And so we're going to get water, and we're going to put it in this big pot, and we're going to boil the water, and we're going to make stone soup. And the boy says, it would taste so much better if you had some lettuce. I will go get some lettuce. And he runs back to his home, and he comes back with the lettuce, gives it to the Buddhist monks. Another villager comes out and says, what are you doing? And the boy says, well, we're making stone soup. And she goes, it would taste so much better if you had carrots. She goes back to her home, comes back, put the carrots in, and on it goes. And each of these individual members of the village keep contributing to this pot of stone soup. And it's important to note, as part of the narrative in the story, is that these neighbors had never talked to each other. Like, they didn't get along, right? But here they are, and they've made the stone soup, and now they have this really wonderful, nutritious soup. And they've also are building community around the making of the soup. And they've all contributed something, and they've all gotten something. To my mind, that is community forestry. And to my mind, that is what we've been doing at Still Meadow. And so we have this team of teams approach, or stone soup approach. And I had to get the book and give it to Pastor Michael. And then he read it. And then he's like, oh my gosh, this is our organizational structure, which was deeply disturbing to him. Deeply disturbing to him, because he is a pastor. He is used to telling everyone what to do, right? And he is used to everyone doing what he tells them to do. He is used to everyone asking him, oh, Pastor, what do you want us to do? And I was like, Pastor Michael, I'm sorry, it's a different organizational structure than the Baptist church, right? But this is how we're going to have to roll. I also got him The Man Who Planted Trees, which was also fun. If you haven't read that book by Sean Sheehan, no. But it was a restructuring of how we approach things, and this idea that we all have roles to play, and those roles are that we might contribute things, but we also may get things, which is fundamental to this idea of co-production. It also is fundamental to this idea, if we go to the preceding image, that remember we had that list of all these problems that have to get solved. Well, I worked for the USDA Forest Service, and it's like, I wasn't going to solve all those problems, right? The Yale interns, they could help to solve some of the problems, but no one had all of the power and resources to do everything themselves, okay? And so you had to figure out a way that everyone was going to contribute to this stone soup. And in doing so, and this is actually part of a diagram that Jen Chin helped put together, we are working in this watershed in this region of the Chesapeake Bay, in the city, the neighborhood, in these forest patches. And we have a number of different aspects of our activity to do. On the silviculture aspects of this, so we have hazard mitigation, site preparation, tree propagation, the usual set of suspects, that you would think about for a whole life cycle of forest regeneration. But key to this, the fundamental thing is not the enumeration of those different activities, but the recognition that we have different people that are contributing to the stone soup of putting this together, right? And so we have the church, we have the community, we have the neighborhood, the workforce. They can do some of these things, but not all of them. Scientists, university, Forest Service, they can do some of it, but not all of it. We have educators, people like my friend Terrace King, who can do some of the things, but not all of them. And then the land managers. Now, Brandon is the land manager for, who's a graduate of here. He's the land manager for Still Meadow Park. So we have these different players that, they're not going to do everything. They can do parts of it, and they're working together. Pastor Michael, like, he was talking about tree propagation and all that stuff. And he said, when I first started working with him, he said, Morgan, if I just started talking about trees, like, he would have kicked me out. But we started talking about the community. And and eventually he got to trees, and he gets all excited. He calls me up when he sees an owl in the forest, right? But I've learned a lot about spirituality, about community organizing, about working with volunteers that are really the bread and butter of how the Baptist Church works. And so we're also learning things from each other in this production of stone soup that really is a fundamental thing. And you should be prepared for that. Right? This is going to be messy, and it's a social process, and you're going to learn new stuff in doing all this. And I, another phrase that I find useful for thinking about this in community forestry, my wife works for Baltimore City Department of Public Works. She's in charge of environmental regulation and compliance for the city. She keeps the city supposedly out of trouble with the state and the feds, where Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, and so on. And she says you should not confuse icing and cake. It's like, what are you talking about? And she goes, well, for me, what I go to Ian, I'm like, hey, this is going to be great, and I think I'm selling you cake, and what you hear is icing. So, Pastor Michael, trees are icing. Spiritual health is cake. For me, trees are cake, spiritual healing is icing, right? So you start to realize this, that, it's, I know now mixing metaphor, stone soup, icing cake, right? But, this is my training from here at the school, is mixing metaphors all the time, is that, how people are hearing you, they may be hearing cake when you're talking about icing, or vice versa. They may hear icing when you're talking cake. So just, that's another thing to keep in mind. But I didn't learn icing and cake. I learned that from here. I learned from my wife. But then what does it start to look like, right? So these are just images of that work that are part of the job training programs that we did. And, one of the things I also learned, I really want to share this, is when we do the workforce training, we have young adults, so between the ages of 18 and 22, they're all Black, and it's usually like a team of 6, like that's kind of manageable. And they learn lots, and we work to help them get jobs, And it's a 10-week program, and at the end of that 10 weeks, they just are devastated. They're so sad. I'm like, why are you all so sad? Like, you guys did great. We learned this. You got jobs and everything. And they said, but I'm going to miss my friends. And I was like, what do you mean? And what I learned was these young people who never really thought about nature, like as a job, or, it was there, and they really liked stuff. They really liked bugs, or they really liked that. But among their friends, they were outcasts. They were the nerds, and not like sciencey nerds, but they liked strange things. They didn't like the normal things that their peers liked. But among that group of 5 or 6, everyone was totally into it. They were no longer the outcasts. They were like, this was their team of teams, like this merry band. And I think that that's another thing that I've come to realize with this work, is that we have a huge reservoir of people who really do care about the environment and are really curious and want to learn and do more, but they have no pathway by which to do it. and that the training program was something that afforded them to pursue those things, but pursue them as together and not be different, not be strange, not be made fun of. And I've realized that this program that we have at Still Meadow, this community forestry, is creating peer groups that just are not achievable in their everyday lives. And that was something that was really important to me. And you know, and I see these. So I live in the city, right? And I'll be out doing something, and you know, one of these guys will see me and like they'll stop their truck and they get out, and I'm like, why is this person jumping out of the car and like yelling at me? And then I realize it's one of my former, you know, staff people, and they're like, hey, I just want to say thank you. And you know, so it's not about me and feeling good. I'm like, for me, it's like they are so excited that they've been able to pursue things that would never occur to them to become a forester, right? And never have a means by which to become a forester. And in doing so, it is also important to turn to like, what do we do with these trees after they come to their inevitable end? I work with a guy, Bob Taylor, who owns Taylor Guitars. And he says, you can never go wrong investing in the inevitable. It's like, wow, that's deep. And he goes, trees dying is inevitable. And I was like, okay. And so we're not talking about tree harvesting per se, but in cities, we lose trees inevitably, right? And we know from work that the USDA Forest Service did that there's more trees from urban areas that go into landfills than is harvested from our national forests. So it's a lot. Okay. And we need to start rethinking what community forestry is. It's more than tree planting and tree maintenance. And so here's a diagram. You look down in the bottom left-hand corner. Who did the diagram? Jen Shin at WRI. In partnership with Cambium Carbon, graduates of this school and the School of Management. They're making a lot of money, by the way. If anyone's looking for a job, I would call them. And so the notion is that we have a tree falls in the city. It does happen. We may or may not hear it. We source that wood milled and processed into lumber or furniture products. We make stuff. We then can use that to build up capacity to plant local native trees. We have new tree planting enabled. And then we have expanded tree maintenance and urban forest management, like thumbs up, like whole cycle, right? And we are investing in the inevitable that trees will die. And what we want to try to make inevitable is that we plant more trees and we take care of those trees. So it's a full funding cycle as well. So what I'd now like to take you to is an example. This is from an example where we were working with a furniture home decor company called Room and Board. You may be familiar with it. Well, no, you're still working on making money. So when you've made more money, you'll be going to Room and Board, maybe. And one of our projects was to work on building deconstruction. So taking down old row homes and recycling all the old growth yellow pine, southern yellow pine that was in those buildings. But we have at Camp Small also reusing all the logs that come from city trees and park trees and street trees, much like we have City Bench here in New Haven that is reusing street trees in New Haven and in other towns nearby. So let us go to Room and Board.
There are many vacant and abandoned buildings in the city. There's a lot of value locked up in those buildings. There's an opportunity to take those buildings and to deconstruct them rather than demolish them. We see the possibility to salvage the materials in the building, and then we see what comes next for that land. And we see how we can actually turn those buildings into bright spots in the community.
The U.S. Forest Service contacted us about an interesting project, reusing salvaged urban wood, and the project really has social benefits as well as environmental benefits, and we were very intrigued by the opportunity, so we called them back right away.
What makes an enterprise truly socially impactful?
right, is that you have an actual mission or a product, a service that you're providing that has positive change. There are actually about 40,000 houses in the city that are presumed vacant. 17,000 have actually been identified. What we actually do, the service we provide, is having a powerful impact on the city of Baltimore. And it's creating jobs for individuals. But the work itself has got real strong environmental and social impact. If you can do it in a way where you can increase that social impact by virtue of making it an employment vehicle for people who've got some challenges getting back into the workplace, now not only do you have a socially impactful service or a product, but you're doing it in a socially impactful way.
The yellow pine that we get from these Baltimore row houses is old growth or second growth. It's trees that pretty much don't exist anymore. We basically take old materials and prepare them to be used again. We try to employ people who have what we call barriers to employment, which is sort of a fancy way of saying that they may have had a felony conviction, they may have had a past problem with addiction, they may not have graduated high school. Oftentimes it can be all of the above. So our mission is to hire these people and train them and equip them with skills that they can use here, but that they can also use in another job.
I was unemployed. You know, I was going through some personal things, so I didn't have a job. But then I got into this program that Manning has, where they help people get back on their feet. And they got me a job here. I've been here ever since. Without a doubt, we're with a great group of guys. I mean, we're not just co-workers, we like family. We help each other here and outside the job, you know, and just make you feel proud. I guess that's the word I'm looking for.
These days we recognize that a lot of people live in urban and urbanizing areas, and their quality of life in those areas is incredibly important, and it's oftentimes dependent upon, in part, the green infrastructure that they have, that is the forests and the trees and the neighborhood parks that they have access to. And that's really critical. That's another element of helping to bring communities back. And so what happens to those lands once the buildings are gone? Well, that's where the Forest Service and many partners come in. And in fact, in Baltimore, partners are driving that process. Parks and People Foundation and others are critical in helping communities imagine what could be on those landscapes.
At the end of the day, when you look over there and you see a park, it's just everything is coming together for the good, you know. And it's just a blessing. You see something that looked like it could not come back to life. It made me think about in the Bible, and it says, can these dry bones live, right? And they came back to life. That's our community, you know, we live in. And I'm happy about it.
I get excited about working with people, meeting new people. The people in Baltimore and the Forest Service that we've connected with are some of the most passionate, brilliant people around. The environmental perspective alone is incredible. I've just been surprised and shocked in the best possible way from the very beginning, and I can't wait to do more.
So what we did was in this project, you saw a number of different parts, and you also saw the importance. You know, it's a recurring theme. Hopefully, you're starting to catch it, which is it required a lot of people to work on this. Required a lot of people with very different perspectives, and through that process, and working with a firm also called Quantified Ventures, also a number of Yale grads from the School of Management, to start to put together the financial model for what that looks like. And in doing so, on the left-hand side, I knew a lot of the wood pieces for this. I led this team, but I didn't know the whole employment part to this. And to put together the financial model of what happens when we reduce recidivism, what happens when we keep things out of the landfill. So we stop treating people and places and materials as waste. This is not only a sort of a systems diagram of how all the parts, this complex system interact, but it's also who gives you an idea of what the organizational network needs to be to make this stone suit. and it's also a data model, and it's also a financial model. So we took this to the Secretary of Housing for the state of Maryland, and he's like, why is the Forest Service here? And it's the first time I ever got to be arm candy. And I was like, well, I'm just here to talk about the wood. And so we ran him through the whole thing, and we said, we think this is worth $27 million. And he was there with the Department of Labor and the Department of Corrections. And we talked about it for a while. He says, my people will get back to you. People get back to us. And they're kind of cheap. They only gave us $15 million to continue the project because they weren't willing to pay for all those other positive externalities. You know, they wanted to pay for the positive direct things that they had. But the key here is not only this idea that we include wood products, but we include many of the other aspects that we have in society, and to signal back that we go back to sustainability development goals to like give you a cue of like what to be thinking about, right? And that we have co-production, that we have a stone soup model, and that we have a means by which that there is underlying principles and approaches that wherever you are, that you'll be able to sort of settle in there and figure out how to bring people together. So in conclusion, some ideas, and I'm going to add another Buckaroo Banzai quote, which is, wherever you go, well, there you are. That's what we started this talk with. But also home is where you hang your hat. That to be prepared to go to different places and to settle in and figure out how this will be your home, and to work with other people who will take you up, and to quote Pastor Michael, that will take you up in fellowship, and to work together. You don't have to solve it all. You just have to find the other people to work with to help to develop solutions. Fundamentally to this, and in both diagrams that we had and in the videos, what you see is that we will, when we say community forestry, it's not just that we're trying to get communities to do forestry, is that the community is the cake and the forestry is the icing. And at the same time, the forestry is the cake and the community is the icing. So to just realize that these things come together. And then finally, and I know that people are like, oh, well, how do you scale this? And like, how are you going to change the world? And I don't really want to change the world. But because I think that's a challenge that maybe we won't do. But there was a word that Pastor Michael used. He said he was a green pastor. He said he's a model, and perhaps he's a resource. And to realize that these projects and these YouTube videos become the resource to be able to do this in other places, to inspire, but also to know how to do it wherever you go and wherever you hang your hat. And so in order to do it, you know, what I would encourage you to think on is to do it, and you're developing knowledge and skills here. This is a powerful place to be, to develop knowledge and skills, and to find the people here who may be part of how you make stone soup. But in doing so, also remember that it's really important to have humility, to have passion, and to do this with joy. Thank you very much. We have some time for some comments, questions.
Yeah. Who wants to go first?
Yeah. You've got to wait for, it always feels like for those of us who remember Phil Donahue.
There's a lot of pressure when you have the mic too. This was brilliant. Yeah, very, very like motivating. I really like the idea of the stone soup, the team of teams. And I just wondered if maybe you had an anecdote or a story, or maybe some deeper thoughts on the fact that teams might face different adversity. They might have different sort of challenges that they come up against, and how, as a team of teams, you can help each other and like maybe help ease some of those frictions, even if you're not part of that particular team.
So in two things, one of which, and they both come from improv jazz and improv comedy, which is that you listen with big ears. So you're listening for like those opportunities to where are people going? Where are they jazzing on? Where are they making, what's the joke? And how do you contribute to it? But to contribute, you got to listen. You can't okay, I know what I'm going to say and I just can't wait for them to stop talking. That doesn't work, right? So that's one thing. And the other thing is to say yes and. Central to improv comedy. So someone makes some outrageous comment and you say yes and. You will now, I'm going to ruin your life because now you won't be able, you will always hear, yes, but I don't disagree with you. Drives me insane when people say that. I don't disagree with you. Why the double negative? Just join. Because the yes and is joining. I don't disagree with you is I agree with you, but I'm not joining. And it goes back to child development behavior, right? Like kids, when they're 3, they always say no. And they don't really mean no, but the way they identify the way that they develop their identity is by saying no. You can't develop your identity by joining. So when you hear people say, I don't disagree with you, they're retain their identity. I bet you hear it a lot in faculty meetings. So I heard a lot in the Forest Service and leadership. And so the words matter in terms of signifying I am listening to you. I'm going to play off of that. And I am joining as a group. So no, but, yes, but, I don't disagree with you. All are killers, not only to the flow, but also our sense of a group. So those are key things in the team. And to also realize, so my Black partners say to me, very candidly, I am the white shield that gets them into white meetings. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, and you're the Black shield that gets me into the Black meetings because they're not trusting this white guy with the beard, right? So, just understand you with practice, but with listening with big ears, you'll start to hear it, right? Karen.
Thanks, Morgan. So again, super inspiring. Loved it. Loved the 2 stories. And I'm not going to ask the scale question.
Okay.
I'm going to ask a slightly different question, but it is really about scale as well.
Okay.
So you have these 2 case studies,
yeah.
basically, where you have the teams of teams, and they're both built on decades of your engagement in these communities. How can we accelerate this, if that is at all possible, because it takes time to be engaged? And what key principles could you distill out of what you've learned from decades of these 2 quite different teams of teams?
I think they're different, but I also think they're identical, to be honest. And what I've tried to do is to present some of the principles. I will give a Yale answer to this, which is I think that we need. So I pitch URI as a place of professional learning, professional practice. We need Yale is URI is enduring, but and building these kinds of things, but allows students to learn how to do this, right? And I think that we have teaching, and I think that we have the Hickson Fellows, so you look after that. I greatly benefit and Pastor Michael calls all these people up, right? And follows up with them. And so I think that the programs that we have in Yale in terms of education in the classroom is really important. I think that your fellowship programs are really important, but I also think that the professional development clinic style opportunities are further important. And we need those places out throughout the country where there's more opportunities to continue to develop resources and to be resources for the rest of the country and internationally, and where our students can go and be part of that. So historically, we thought that the urban field stations for the Forest Service would play that kind of role. So I think that there are means by which that we can work across scales and work up and down scales for this to occur, but we need to be we need to have that strategy, right? I'm kind of doing it we did it implicitly and a little bit explicitly, and we would have done it more explicitly if there had ever been money within the Forest Service to say, okay, like, how are we going to do it? I was always doing it through subversion and infiltration, right? But I think your questions are terrific, and I do think that Yale has been doing some of this already, right? It's the opportunities to get to make mistakes and to learn is outside the classroom is, I think, one of the key things, and start to feel comfortable, like that you're in really awkward situations, and it's like, it's going to be okay. Like, and you'd have me with you, and, Maggie and I, we went to some meetings that were a little bit awkward, where people were upset about one thing or another. And it's like, no, Maggie, we're going to get through this, So does that help? All right.
Okay, I think we have time for one more.
Hi.
But by the way, I didn't ask for like $10 million. Just clear.
I just thought I'd join the conversation. So I'm Terry Asako Ogawa. I'm the new program manager at the Yale Center for Environmental Justice, but I was previously a regional minister for the United Church of Christ in Southern New England.
Okay.
So when you're asking scale and how can you do this and partners, I mean, I love the idea of contacting the regional ministry bodies and saying, we have this prototype, we have this case study, exactly what you said, this can be an example. There are tons of churches that have lots of acreage. I had a church in North Carolina, we had 5 acres. It wasn't enough to do managed forestry, but we figured out how to make
5 acres is enough. But
they told us no, because we asked.
I would have done that.
It was longleaf pine. They just said, leave it. It's doing what it needs to do. But I think you can find ways. There's willing partners when you find them. And it also depends on churches like that or whatever community partner, right? Having those strong community partnerships and trust that Pastor Michael had, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's immediately translatable and something that you could do quite quickly. I'm happy to talk more to anybody who wants to.
Thank you for that. And I'll add that Room and Board is trying to scale this, and it was also part of it inspired them to become a B corporation. And I'll add that there's 21,000 municipalities in the United States, and every single one of them has a wood problem. I'm feeling pretty good about solving that problem, right? And thank you. Like, you have your church networks. Use the networks. Thank you all.
All right. And if you want to keep this